In the 1970s, there was this idea of the homebrew computer. Like people were first starting to learn about computers in like a more personalized context. Because before, you had like the ENIAC and these big vacuum tube filled machines, and then the advent of the transistor started to shrink technology down, so these computers were not actually taking up the full size of a room. And eventually, like things were getting down to the mini computer, and around the 1970s, technology had gotten to the point where people were actually starting to experiment personally. Like they were starting to build out their own home computers. And there were lots of schematics that were, passed around through these homebrew clubs. And there were also starting to be some consumer-oriented hobbyist computer devices. But at the end of the day, these were all like very nerdy devices. Like you had to have like a breadboard that you hand wrapped and wired yourself, and you had these like very huge books that were like guides on how to actually set this all up, and people just didn't actually really care. Like if you were a normal person that was not a nerd, that you could see these things and you could be like, that's really neat, but that's never going to sit on my desk. Like people are saying this is the future, but I just don't see it. But one thing you have to think about is what came out of that. So during the 1970s, there was one particular homebrew club, the Homebrew Computer Club, very aptly named. And there was a trio of individuals there that ultimately became the founders of Apple Inc. And they introduced a personal computer at the Homebrew Computer Club called the Apple One. And it was pretty janky. I've talked about this in previous streams and actual talks that I've done at like FarCon and a talk I gave at Coinbase. And this device was a very clunky wooden thing, and that was the prototype. And but nevertheless, it like changed the narrative a bit, because instead of people having to, manually build these things themselves, it was something instead that people could buy. Like it was a consumer-oriented device, and it was something that really started to challenge the narrative of what a personal computer was and what that actually meant. And so you started to see this change in the industry that companies were slowly working towards and building, where you had what was the previous, industry niche of the mini computer, and IBM being very slow to pick up on that. And then you had the advent of the personal computer, and again, IBM was very slow to pick up on that. But by around the 1980s, the personal computer had started to take off, and people were actually using it for things that was more than just like geeking out. Like people are starting to actually use these for financialized applications. And so as these offshoots started to spring up, you started to see competition occur within these industries, because there was suddenly a influx of money that was accumulating from all the different entrants. And one of the things that was really important to notice is that a lot of engineering went into this, because these people were, obviously talented hardware engineers, and they may have worked in other industries that were adjacent to this, but trying to like compress everything down into the most cost economic way for a business to produce it, but still functional means for a consumer to do powerful things that they couldn't do before. Like back in the day, you were doing spreadsheets by hand, and now you can do spreadsheets on a computer that can sit on your desk and you can print that out, and that was very novel. But ultimately, like things started to move beyond just basic finance. But there were some companies that couldn't get past that. That was their bread and butter. They sold to accountants. They sold to business leaders, and that was it. Like that, they thought that that was the depth of computing. And so you didn't really have a whole lot of people who were like teachers or creative artists or anything like that had quite gotten into the realm of using a personal computer. And through the conversations that Steve Jobs and others at Apple had with individuals who are working in those industries, he realized that the personal computer was not personal enough, that there were things that needed to be done that moved beyond finance. And at the time, that was basically received by the industry as a joke. People did not think that that was necessary, that there wouldn't be money in it, that people wouldn't have a computer on every single desk in their home, like that this wasn't going to be something meaningful, but he thought differently. And by consequence, Apple quickly seized the entire market for education, seized the entire market for creative types, and ultimately blossomed into the Apple ecosystem that we know and love today. And I think about this lesson a lot, because it's one of those moments in history where people are looking back at things like the early days of crypto, where we are just beginning to eke out this idea of decentralized finance, that we're, challenging the notion of fiat rails, that we're challenging the notion of just the sheer concept of interchange of value. And ultimately, things continue to develop and create new ecosystems. You have these new chains that emerge that start to expand the capabilities and start to create these new ideas and more complexity. And ultimately, what I'm seeing is that exact same pattern play out again. We are seeing the world of crypto focusing just on finance. When you start to see things like people focusing on creators, like they'll talk about the creator economy, what you'll notice when you listen to what they're saying is that when they talk, they are talking about putting creators into a financialized topic, like putting art on chain, putting music on chain, and selling these things as NFTs. They are strictly focused on the financial. They're not focused on the things that artists personally care about. Because yes, to an artist, there is a business side to them, but they are not strictly in the business of art. They are in the passion of art. And it's these types of things that I feel like our industry is just completely glossing over. And it's something that's going to blindside them when there is actually something much more capable and much more adept at handling what it is that these individuals actually want to do to pursue their passions vigorously.